This is Darren Marchant, and this is American Nomad News. Darren Marchant with American Nomad News. This is Richland Hills, Texas. And a thick fog, cool temperatures. No rain or mist falling at the moment, with a low visibility. Thankfully, light traffic. It is January 24th, 2021. Please drive carefully. And pay attention. Yeah, like that. It's funny how the fog tends to make you want to be quiet. At least it does me. Up Against the Wall with Darren Marchant for American Nomad News. Good morning. This is Darren Marchant with American Nomad News, and it is a dim and foggy morning here in Richland Hills. And I find myself thinking about birthdays. How different cultures in the world think about birthdays. It's kind of an interesting subject, isn't it? We like to have balloons and cake and blow out the candles and all of these traditions. Even though some of us think we shouldn't have babies, we shouldn't have births. So we still celebrate birthdays. I, for one, am all for having children. I see that all of the prophets of the Abrahamic traditions told us to take every child as an increase in wealth and to trust in God. But this morning, I'd like to point out something kind of interesting about these concepts. It's not too long ago that a new Supreme Court justice by the name of Amy Coney Barrett was selected and approved for the Supreme Court. And not without a significant amount of controversy and haranguing. And she came through it with flying colors. Yeah. And to her credit, she pointed out that she would follow the meaning of the law without letting her own personal opinions get in the way. I think it's her religion that taught her to be honest about agreements. And that's what the law is. It's a form of agreement. It's a kind of contract. And the reason that she was so controversial is because she's Catholic and pro-life. And the Catholic community and other Christian communities and others in the United States have been fighting the battle over Roe versus Wade and other pro-choice, which is kind of a cop-out, linguistic cop-out, for a long time. Why do I say it's a linguistic cop-out? I'll explain that one real quick and get on with the rest of the explanation. You're either pro-life or you're pro-death. And if you're honest enough to call yourself pro-death, well, then it kind of exposes your tactics and your intentions in an unpleasant light. And those who call themselves pro-choice because they don't want to face the pro-death aspect of their argument, well, I'll let you sort that out. But it's interesting to note that Islam is largely left out of this discussion. It's a very interesting thing. What is Islam's position on the value of a child? Without drawing conclusions, I don't want to interpret for you, but I want to put some things on the table that are of interest. A Muslim's age is not considered upon the date of the birth of the individual. It is the conception. From conception, this is your age. If I'm getting this correct, and if there's anyone out there, any scholars out there that want to put in an opinion about this, please do. Okay. Another thing is that the Quran makes multiple mentions of the earliest stages of human development. It's not talked about a lot, but it's definitely in the Quran. Did I not make you from and I'm paraphrasing here a little bit, a bit of fluid despised, right? In the Hadith, there's a somewhat controversial piece of history. A woman came to the Prophet, Muhammad Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, and confessed that she had committed zina or adultery, and she demanded the punishment of being stoned to death. And there's a bit of a round and around that went on, where it appears that Muhammad Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam gave her several chances to survive this. Right? That there was a doorway open to her being forgiven on these things. And she persisted. That's the way it reads. It's very interesting. She was pregnant. And the final ruling came down that she could not be given the punishment of stoning to death until the child was born. And this is fraught with controversial things that sets off people's discussions. But I want to point out that it places a value on the child, a very high value. Why are children valuable? Why are they important to us? Well, I wouldn't be giving you this report if I had not been born. And you would not be watching it if you had not been born. In a recent video that I watched regarding a gentleman by the name of Kuklinski, and he was a celebrated hitman for the mob, a Polish American with a long and vicious career of committing contracted hits. And the interesting thing about this interview is that the psychologist was asked by the hitman, "Tell me about myself." So interesting. And the psychologist explained to him that there were two factors that were really prevalent in his psychology and explained a lot of his life. One was a genetic variant, which people who have this variant tend to be very fearless, devoid of a reaction to fearful kinds of situations. And the other was his upbringing. And I might be getting a little bit of this a little bit misleading, not intentionally, but, and so I'm going to try and put the link in the description, try and remember to do that. And it was said that a child that grows up unloved, that is treated harshly, and they have these kinds of conditions, they tend to have some problems later in life. Society tends to get some pushback from this kind of thing. And yet others who have a rich and supportive, not rich as in money, but a fertile and supportive environment in childhood, who have these conditions, go on to be bomb disposal guys, or race car guys, or test pilots, pushing the limits. And so I find that really quite interesting. There was another gentleman that I think about often on this subject, Robert Malthus. And my personal opinion on him is that he was suffering from clinical depression. He posited that every child born brought a quanta, a unit of measure of misery into the world. I feel bad for this guy, dude. Seriously. This is pretty sad. That means that he felt guilty for being born. If he's honest, if he really meant this, he felt bad that he was born, that he felt that he brought a unit of quantifiable unit of measure of misery into the world. It's tough stuff. So I extend his theory out a bit. I say that every child born brings a quanta, a unit of definable measure of potential, good or bad, It's what we do with them. It's how we treat them. We can coddle them and they become spoiled and problematic and tend to be afraid and just problem. We can torture them and be harsh on them and push them too far and love them too little, and they become vicious, like a dog been kicked too much. Or we can raise them expecting a lot of them, giving a lot to them, and driving them to succeed, to respect others, to respect themselves, to respect knowledge, and to behave well, and to achieve much. This is Darren Marchant with American Nomad News, saying you are valuable, and so are those around you. Give peace, and if they demand it, give war. But give value to yourself and others. Forgive often, even when the other side doesn't deserve it. It's a reduction of your own burdens. Thank you for joining me. Give some love to Tony's Music in Richland Hills. Recently, his brother dropped a gift card on me, and we're going to pass that on to the Trinity Point Church. God bless. This is Darren Marchant, and this is American Nomad News. Astroponics. This is Darren Marchant with American Nomad News. And thoughts on rockets. Now, I tend to spend a lot of my time talking about life support systems and astroponics. But you don't get astroponics in space without propulsion. And so a discussion of propulsion systems and their potentials is in order. Now, from the surface of Earth to space requires so much power, and I'll leave out all the technical jargon because I think that confuses things and kind of blocks people's minds. So I want to just talk about things in basic simplicities. So that's why you see these very large rockets that their fuel tanks are much larger than their payload, and they have really large, loud engines that produce a lot of smoke and flame, and all of this basically spells into really powerful but inefficient. And it's just, it comes with the territory if you want to go from the surface of the Earth to low Earth orbit. But once you get to low Earth orbit, things change a bit. It comes down to, once you're in low Earth orbit, if you are in a hurry, you've got living beings on board and not a lot of shielding and that kind of thing, and you want to go from low Earth orbit to the moon, say, or to the orbit of the moon, and you don't want to take a lot of time, then you use those same kinds of rockets, inefficient but powerful and fast. Boom, go now, right? Like that guy with the big jacked up truck that always has to rev his engine at the street light. That guy. Okay, but there's a whole nother class of engines that are very popular to build on to satellites and other probes and things that they really need efficiency more than speed and power. And they're called electric propulsion. And there's a few varieties, but basically it comes down to you're emitting a gas into a space in the machine that causes the gas to pick up an electric charge. And that electric charge, the way this electric propulsion system works out, it's designed so that that atom or molecule of gas, depending on what gas you're using, whether it's elemental or a compound or an element, not element, what am I thinking? It's either elemental or it's molecule, okay. That charged gas wants to leave, it wants to go away really fast. And that, for that one little atom, say of argon, that will impart a lot of energy per mass, right, onto the rocket. But because an atom all by itself is very tiny, the actual power, effect on the propelled object isn't very much, but it's very efficient. And so over time, these satellites, they can quiet little plasma coming off of this thing, and it usually glows just a little bit. It's not really super bright, and there's no smoke, and there's very, very little noise, if all, when they do it in labs here on Earth. And in space, the vibration doesn't go anywhere because it's a hard vacuum around it. So you're not going to hear anything anyway. But it's very efficient that way. Now there's another class of rockets that's very similar to the liquid fuel rockets that you see, and I'm kind of trying to shield my cell phone because it's a falling mist, and it's getting my cell phone wet, and I want to be careful because it's got a cracked screen. I don't know. I've dropped it like twice. I really need to get it fixed. And that's solid rocket motors. Now, solid rocket motors are kind of just a little bit unpopular with the rocket crowd because you can't throttle them. That's one difference between solid rocket motors, electric propulsion, and liquid fuel. Electric propulsion and liquid fuel, you can pull back on the gas on them things and they stop. You can stop propelling, you can stop adding propulsion. And with solid rocket motors, no. And there's another problem with solid rocket motors that's an issue, and that's that they're dirty. Now here on Earth, particulate really isn't that big of a deal because it's going to settle out with rain, right? We're more concerned about greenhouse gases and things that are toxic to animals and stuff. But if it's something that's just kind of dust and it's going to settle out, it's not a big deal. But in low Earth orbit or out in space, particles that are grainy, larger than atoms, and they're moving very fast, that's like sandblasting on steroids. It's pretty rough stuff for ships. So it counts as orbital debris. And it's impossible to see it. You cannot, even if you were 3 inches away from it with sensitive instruments, you might not be able to really tell particulate in orbit. It's like super hard to reach, to see. But you would definitely see the damage to your surfaces of your craft as the metal is eaten away. In fact, one of the things that NASA did was some experiments with different materials because they were getting atomic oxygen atoms, individual atoms were making little pits on the surface of their material, and it was happening so much it was like it's sandblasting on an atomic scale. It was ridiculous. And so they have to have special materials that can withstand a lot of this. It's one of the things that in the future, as we get more and more activity in space, we want to address some of these things. And there's ways to do that. There really is. So one way that solid rocket motors actually could be controlled is through incrementation, cartridges. Okay, now let's say that you're on the moon and you have a craft that, and solid rocket motors are fairly cheap and safe to handle. They're not like liquid fuel that can blow up and stuff. They got a lot of safety value to them if you work them right. So a shotgun has cartridges. You put 6 or 7 of these into the shotgun, and you cock the shotgun, pull back the hammer, boom, right? You got boom. And that's propulsion. That's the kick of a gun, is when it pushes back on you. Now, one of the things about solid rocket motors is they're typically made, not always, but typically made so that you have to pump oxygen down through them. They're like a cylinder. They're a thick-walled cylinder, and the cylinder itself is actually the fuel. And the oxidizer goes down through the middle, and that creates that really strong push. Not all of them are like that. Like the little toy rocket ones are, you don't have to have that. You just light them and the oxygen's built into the chemistry of the solid material. But now let's imagine that you have a system whereby you have several of these cartridges, and they're precision made so that you know how much thrust you're going to get out of each cartridge. And it's almost enough to safely land on the surface of the moon or take off, right? It's got that balance to it. And so you actually have 2 rocket systems. You have a liquid fuel system and you have a cartridge system. And the cartridge system, what it does is it gives you that extra boost to land, or to control vectors, like you could use them to emergency maneuvers in order to avoid orbital debris or that kind of thing. So you load you engage the mechanism to load a cartridge into the chamber. Oxygen is fed down through the center, and the thing is lit, and out comes your thrust, and it's going to burn up. Just like a shotgun shell is ejected from the shotgun, you eject the cartridge into a capture container, because you don't want that stuff floating around. It's called foreign object defect, FOD. It's a typical Air Force and airport security issue. They want you to pick up all your tools, and they don't want stuff laying around the flight deck because it can get sicked up in the engine. So here we go. You're in orbit, and your systems are telling you, your flight control guys are telling you, hey, look, there's an uncontrolled object coming your way. We need you to move out of the way, right? Your system says, beep, 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 you need to move. Okay, so you engage your cartridge and aim it in the right direction, and you get 60-80% of your propulsion that you need to move out of the way in that thrust. It spins the cartridge, expels it, and your electric propulsion finishes off, right? You might even be running both at the same time. You got electric propulsion that starts up immediately as your alarms start going off, and you engage the cartridge because you want to move. You see this thing coming. You've got it on, it's tracking, and you can see it on your instrumentation. You're like, oh crap, I got an old dead Russian satellite that nobody ever picked up, cleaned up. I gotta move out of the way, oh boy. And you hit that thruster, plink, 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 it goes into the container. It's controlled. It's shut off. And it's not entirely what you need. That's that padding that you have. So the electric propulsion shuts off when it reaches exactly the amount of thrust differential that you need. That change of velocity, the delta V. So cartridge solid rocket motors. Another concept. Another way to look at it. Maybe some of the things that I've mentioned are not, when the engineers get to look at them and say, no, that doesn't really work because of, okay, I totally get that. But there might be an application for cartridge solid rocket motors. You got 50 in a clip, just like shotgun, right? Just like a banana clip on a M16. Click. And they could be that big around and 2 feet long. They could be the size of a shotgun cartridge to fit the parameters of the situation. There you go. Sorry for the shaky camera. I'm trying to hold it as steady as I can. This is a little back lot behind the church, more to the side of the church, adjacent to the parking lot. And I was checking out the little corner out here because I'm planning to do some cleanup. I bought some plastic garbage bags. Sponsored by the people on the off-ramp who give me money. And I found something that's really cool. And one of my kind of favorite hobbies, I guess you could call it, is learning the names for different branches of science. And it's really cool. There's a lot of different branches of science. And the names are kind of fun to learn. One of those is mycology, the study of funguses and their role in nature, identification, all that kind of thing. A lot like botany, where botany is the study of plants and their role in nature and their names and all these kinds of things and how to identify them. Now it's pretty awkward back here because there's a lot of these really thorny little vines that I have yet to identify, and I hope it's not something poisonous. But down here, look at that, right in the center of the screen. Okay, let's see here. Okay, now that's pretty cool. Okay, so we're going to zoom in here real quick and take a good close look. Be back with you in a minute. here's a little bit closer look. I'm going to tell the cell phone to zoom in a little bit. Okay, now let's see if we can. Sorry about the shaky camera. Oh, there we go. We're getting a little bit better image. They look like little oyster shells, and they're paper thin. Let me see if I can get in here just right. And you can see where where's my finger at. Ooh, 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 ooh. Okay. I want to get my finger in there so you can see the scale. See, they are really just paper thin. Okay. Give some love to Tony's Music in Richland Hills. Recently, his brother dropped a gift card on me, and we're going to pass that on to the Trinity Born Church. God bless. And the police officer approached in a car, shook his head no. I turned to him, showing my sign written on cardboard and marker, American Nomad News on YouTube, and said, "I'm promoting my YouTube channel, Freedom of Speech." He made a smirk and gave me a thumbs up and drove off in a huff. American Nomad News on YouTube. This is Darren Marchant, and this is American Nomad News. It's Darren Marchant with American Nomad News. I've come across something recently that's a little odd. YouTube has apparently set a limit on how many subscriptions I can have. And whether I subscribe to certain YouTube channels or not, I'm still going to get them in my feed, even if I repeatedly click on them and request that they not be sent to my feed. And these are YouTube channels that have a certain style, there's a certain quality to them, and they all have millions of subscribers. So, okay, so let's say that for the advertising dollars, if you have over a certain number of subscriptions and views, you're just automatically going to get fed. So there's no reason for me to subscribe to these channels. It actually limits the originality that I get to see. And I am forced to skip them first in order to get them out of the way. because I'm sick of seeing them. I don't want to see them. If it's the only thing to see, I'm clicking on them, and then I'm like, wait a minute, this is not what I want to see. I want to see something unique. I want to see something new. I want to see something fresh. And I'm not. I'm seeing the same short list of acting and presentation over and over and over again. And I'm not seeing the stuff that really makes me feel connected to society. So I've made a policy decision. If you have over 1 million views, I'm going to unsubscribe. I used to subscribe to anything that was interesting to me, but now I've realized that if you have over 1 million subscriptions, I have really no need to subscribe to your channel anyway. It's going to be forced down my gullet anyway. I'm not really pleased with that, but okay. And another thing I discovered were channels with millions of subscribers. The content was terrible. I mean, not even any effort whatsoever. And these are people I'd never heard of, never seen. I don't know. So, okay, I'm going to unsubscribe from them too. I'm thinking there's some way they've hacked it. They've created 1 million bot accounts and gone through and selectively subscribed to each other. So each one gets millions of views and millions of subscriptions, and they get advertising dollars to get a fat paycheck. And they don't have to work at it. They don't have to try. So this is not interesting to me either. This is, and there's no advertising value in this either. So the advertisers that are on these channels are wasting their money paying people who are just programming bots to subscribe to each other. So what's the point? And I'm kind of offended because I have less choice than I used to. On YouTube, I used to put in a search phrase and I would get things that were directly related to my search phrase. Now I get 1 or 2 items, maybe they're kind of related, but they're in the high view count area, and I get lots of stuff that's just there because it's got lots of views and lots of subscriptions. And I used to be really excited when I found some obscure guy, 3 or 4 or 5 views, and he's from a little seaside town in England, and he's really excited about his town. I thought this was really cool. I like that. And the advertiser shouldn't care. If I'm viewing it and the ad shows up in front of me, I'm the person that's important is the viewer, not the content. The content should be what I choose, and then the advertiser is advertising to a person who is relevant to their product. I'm seeing a lot of advertisements that are not relevant to me. I can't buy a car. Why advertise cars to me? That kind of thing. I don't buy feminine products. Do I look like I buy feminine products? Seriously, do I look like I buy feminine products? Don't advertise that stuff to me. Okay, it's pointless. It really is. Okay. And that's not a sexist thing. I don't need them. There's no way I'm going to need that. So, yeah, if anybody out there has some thoughts on why it is that really interesting content is hard to get it to come. I want to see original content. And when I was looking at Reddit, I was really interested in Reddit when I was at the library. And that's when I think a pissed off librarian hacked my Google account and got me thrown off of Google. But luckily I had the cell phone already plugged in, and so the security risk that Google presents to me was limited by the fact that I'd already gotten a password in, and I don't dare touch it on the cell phone. If I lose this cell phone, I'm probably going to lose my YouTube account and have to start over again, and my Facebook account and all that. And the funny thing is Facebook already knows who I know, partially. And then I lose my other contacts. The other people I'm interested in knowing, they get alienated from me. And so I know that there's something hinky going on, and there's this background cultural thing. But yeah, I find it really interesting that I'm divided from the low view count crowd, and the low view count crowd should be getting more views, but they're not. And it makes me wonder why. Thank you. This is American Nomad News. Darren Marchant, signing off.